right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandor, and today I'm going to give you a talk about Angular on Fire. And what that means and why I titled the talk Angular on Fire is because it's about Angular and Firebase. So, of course, we have Firebase with some cool animations and Angular as well. So, the agenda for this talk is first I will introduce Firebase and tell you a little bit about that, showcase what the live demo is going to be about, and what features are included in the Firebase toolkit. Next, I will talk about the real-time database, and this will be my main focus for this talk, since I think that is the most exciting thing about Firebase. And of course, since this is an Angular event, I'm going to cover AngularFire 1 and 2, which of course combines Firebase and Angular very nicely. And at the end, I'm going to demonstrate a live demo for you, showcasing the power of Firebase, and hopefully you'll see that it's a very, very great toolkit. So, what is Firebase? Well, Firebase is this big toolkit for developers, which includes a lot of features like the real-time database, which I will showcase after this, and authentication, and storage, and hosting, and a lot of different other things. The thing is here that if you're a developer and you're developing apps for the web, or you're developing games or any other stuff, Firebase is a great toolkit, since you get all of these tools in one set. So you can like keep it consistent with that toolkit. So the real-time database here. Do everyone know what NoSQL is? Show of hands. Great. The real-time database in Firebase is a NoSQL database. So that means we don't have tables, we don't have columns, we don't have foreign keys and relations. And the way the data is structured is like a JSON object. And the reason why this database is called the real-time database is because it uses WebSockets for synchronizing the data between the database and the view. So instead of just using regular HTTP request or AJAX request, which would be it would be very processor consuming to do that like every millisecond. We instead use WebSockets, which sets up the connection between the database and the view, and make sure to update the data as we go. Another thing about the real-time database is that it's capable of handling the offline and the connection loss very well. This means that since your data in your view is connected with the database and it's synchronized, even though you lose the connection of your browser or your device or anything, the data will still persist on your disk. And as soon as you you reestablish your connection to the network, it will synchronize the data, and you'll be good to go again. And Firebase will of course handle everything about priority of the data transmissions and so forth. So let's just jump out to show how the live demo is going to look. And I know this is not some fancy material design kind of application here. It's very basic, and that means that that we can focus on the real stuff. So in this demo, I have two browser windows open here. Let's just resize these. And to those of you who don't know what real time means in this aspect, I'm gonna show you a basic messaging app. So let's try to write some messages. As you can see here, it updates and synchronizes very perfectly in the other browser. And if we jump over to the other one, you can also write there. And here I've made use of the most important tools of Firebase. So you can delete data, you can update data, and you can create data. So I thought it could be a great demo for this purpose. Yeah. So how does the data structure look in our Firebase real-time database? Well, as you can see here, you have in the top the ngAarhus, which is our root node. And this root node is just an unique identifier which Firebase creates by itself when you create the project. And everything beneath this is children, which you have the full command and control of. And as you can see a very great resemblance to the JSON kind of object structure. And that is because the real-time database is only objects, it's JSON. So I'm going to showcase how you can handle this, because you are going to have some issues with arrays and lists in the end, since this is all objects, and that is something that AngularFire is going to take care of and help you with. But we'll get back to that. Also, in the Firebase database, you have these security rules, because you want to validate your data before it gets into the database, so you don't get some hacky data or something which is not valid. So how you do this is by making a rule set, and you structure that rule set in the same manner as the database is structured. So as you can see here, the root node of this is the rules string, and then you kind of append all the child nodes beneath it. So the main things you have to know about the security rules are the read, write, and validate kind of methods or keys or names. And what these does is they take an expression, and according to that expression, it will allow you to either read or write, or not read or write in this case. So if we look here at the .read beneath the UID, the expression is stated as auth.uid equals to $UID. And now you're thinking, what is $UID? This doesn't make any sense if you haven't worked with it any yet. So the $UID are wildcards, and wildcards is essentially just variables inside the security rules. And as you can see here beneath users, we are using a wildcard. So this wildcard refers to each individual user in that node. So we have a variable which indicates the ID, and we can now use that ID in our expressions. So at the read, we are telling it to we are making the expression that auth.uid, which is Firebase's authentication, it checks if the user's ID is the same and equals to the ID of this parent node. If it is, the user is allowed to read and write at that node. So, and it's very important to make sure that you have set up the right rules if you want to make your database secure. But when you're just making hobby projects in your spare time, I usually just set all the rules to read and write to true, so I can read and write, and I don't have to create and make the authentication system first. So I want to get started quickly. And then the last thing is this validate. And as you can see here, validate has some variables that you can use. For example, new data, which is the data which is just coming into the database, which you can you can check up on this and validate this new data. So you can validate it by using methods like isString to check if the new data is a string. You can validate and check how long the string is. You can check if this new string, which is inserted into the database, is this located somewhere else where it must be to ensure that we have the correct data put into our database. So there's a lot of things to do here, and if you just are doing hobby projects, it's not the most important part of Firebase. So now when we're talking about a NoSQL database, we don't have these tables and we don't have relations and foreign keys. So it's very important to denormalize your database. How many knows about denormalization? Hands up. Okay, so about 50%. Well, the essential part about denormalization is that you want more data so you can make faster and more scalable queries. In this example, we have a data structure of users, and we have events, and we have event attendees, which kind of resembles the connection between the event and the users. But with this, we have to make a lookup for these event attendees relations, and we have to look up each user to get the extended information of those users. So we don't want to do that in our database. We want to denormalize it by when you create the event relation, you want to put all of the necessary user information inside of that node as well. So when you pull out the data that you need, you get everything, so you don't have to make multiple requests. So how do you connect to a database? Yeah, well, you do this by using references. And references in Firebase is essentially just a pointer to a specific location inside the database. So as you can see here, we have Firebase, and we initialize the database with the database function, and then you extend that with the ref function. The ref function, if you don't give it any arguments, it will just refer to the root node. But you can give it arguments, as you could also give it the argument of user as a string to reference to the user's node. And at last, at these references, you can also extend it with the child method and kind of append and go down the node structure. So how do you retrieve data from your database to your view? Well, Firebase has these 4 main event types. The first one is called value at the top. I'm not sure if you can read it. It's not the best color choice. But this event type is triggered whenever any changes are happening in the database at that reference. So you don't have that much control, but if that is the necessary functionality you want, then that's fine. You use value. But if you want to be more specific about when the event should be triggered, you have event types like child added, child remove, and child change, which are triggered when these events happen. So the WebSockets can push through the data at certain events. So how do you use these event types? Well, you do this by using a reference, which we talked about before. And on this reference, you use the on method, which takes an event type, and then it takes it gives you a snapshot of the data which is presented when this event is triggered. So in this method, you can do things with the snapshot with the data that you get back. And when you have a Firebase application where you have a lot of these event listeners set up, that is not great if you're building a single page application. So you of course want to control this, and you can do that by shutting every event listener off with the off method, or you can shut specific event listeners off by giving it an event type and then a callback from the specific event. And then at last you have the once method, which just triggers once. You can use this if you want data on load and you don't want it to be real time. Then this is really great. Let's move on. So many of you may wonder, how do we query in this kind of database with a JSON structure? This is essentially just 8 kind of samples of how you can query. There are of course more advanced queries than these, but this should give you an idea of how you query inside of this Firebase toolkit. So the first we create a reference, and we create a reference to the user's node. And then at our first sample here, we have we need to select a specific user by its user ID. And we do this just by taking child 12 at the user's node. So it will find whichever kind of key which resembles the number 12. So okay, that's great. We get a whole object and a whole user. But what if we want to get specific users and filter in our data? Well, we can order by child. and we can say that we want to order by email, and we will have that email equal to some kind of string. Then you get all the emails or all the users which has the email equal to this string. And you of course have the limit to first and limit to last, where you give it a number and you get a certain amount of records out. But it's not, and that's of course great for pagination and making sure that you don't fill the user with too much data. So that is also a necessary method. But you can kind of see here all these things. It is possible in Firebase. It's not always the most beautiful things to do. As you can see at the bottom sample I've made here, the 8ref, where you want to get the records of a specific age and location at the same time. You could do this by making multiple what is called queries, but you can also just denormalize your database and make it a name called age location, which is a combination of the age and location. And then you can make one single query which will find your necessary data. So, AngularFire 1 and 2. What is that? Well, it's a library which makes Firebase even more Angular in its way to work with. It gives you some services which makes it easier for you to develop with Firebase in an Angular application. So, how to get started? Well, you have to configure the Firebase first in your application, and you can get some instructions on how to get it started at their AngularFire GitHub. And basically, this is what you want to do at the beginning of your app when you're configuring your application. You initialize Firebase with the initialize app method, where you give them these configurations. And these configurations, it's not because it's not unsecure for me to show you my configurations. If I set up my security rules correctly, you can't do anything about them, so it's not unsecure to put out there in the code. And Firebase is taking care of all the security behind that. So first up, our first service is the Firebase Object Service. So at the top, I've made a reference. And this is a reference to the details node inside the side nodes, which is inside the root node. So what I do with the Firebase Object Service, I just provide it with the reference. And what it gives me in return is a synchronized object of that specific place in the database. So with this synchronized object, it's great to know that it's not synchronized from the client's point of view, not by itself. But if the database is getting updated, it will be reflected upon your data and your view. But if you change your object in your view at your client, it will not be reflected at the database. Here you have to use methods like $save to save the object, or $remove if you want to remove it from the database. And you can also use the $loaded to get a response back for when the data is loaded, so you can do some actions and resolve that promise. So, and the very last, if you really want this real-time connectivity between your data and your client, you can use the bind-to method, which takes a scope, and it takes a string, which is where on the scope you want this data to be bound. Yeah. We also have the Firebase array, and here is what I told you about before. The Firebase real-time database is built of an JSON object, and this means that we don't have any lists, we don't have any arrays in our Firebase database. So, but when we are working with Angular, we want to be able to use ngRepeat or ng4 if you're using Angular 2 or just Angular. And this is why Firebase Array is such an essential service for the AngularFire library. So in this example, we have a reference to the messages node, and we create we use the Firebase array and input the reference as an argument. And what it returns is a synchronized array of that node. So what can we do here? We can do some other things that we couldn't do with the object. Here we can use the $add function where we just give it some kind of data. It could be an object, it could be a string, a number, anything. And this will just append and extend the array with that new data. And you can, of course, this returns a promise, so you can, of course, .then on this to do something when you get the response. And the response you get back is the new data which is put in. So Firebase has this really great way of dealing with new data. If you don't give it a specific ID, Firebase will also generate an ID for you. So if you have a list of messages, you of course don't want to keep to be the one who have to control and all the IDs and get what is the last message ID. Okay, I have to increment that by 1 and so forth. So Firebase takes care of that with generating a random GUID made from some kind of timestamp. So that's great. The other thing, if you want to remove something, you cannot remove the whole array here. You have to remove individual items. So you use the $remove method, and then you provide it with an item, which of course should be in the array. And you can of course also get a response, a promise, and you can resolve that promise and so forth. And the same goes for if you want to edit some parts of the array. You have to use the $save method, but this time it takes an argument. It takes either the index at the array or the record itself. So yeah, that's great to know, and we are going to use these services in our live demo. So let's get started. All right. Here I have a simple index.html file and a script.js file. I really want to make sure that this demo is as simple as it can get. So I will not make it too complicated in my coding and jump all around. And also over here I have loaded up the file in each browser here. So what we have here in our index file is a simple HTML structure where I set ngApp equals to fire app is the name of our app. And then I load in the scripts which were on the GitHub, AngularFire GitHub. And here I load Angular, I load Firebase, and I load AngularFire. That's all we need. And it's really, really easy to set up. You can, of course, also use NPM or Bower if you are using that kind of setup. And at our body, I set the ng controller. Of course, this is not how you want to do it in a bigger application. But just for this demo sake, I've used the ng controller here, and I set it to fire controller, and I use the as controller syntax in this case. And at the end here, I include my script. So we actually could get something done. But before we code, I will just show you the Firebase console and how it looks. When you go to console.firebase.google.com, this is Google-owned. Firebase is Google-owned. You can log in with your Google ID, and you are presented with this page where you have all your projects, and you of course have a limit. And another thing, it's free to use, and with the free subscription, it's great. It's fine for your own spare time projects. But if you want to do something for some customers, then you have to, of course, pay for that. So let's get started. Create a project here, and let's just call it for demo. And we are in Denmark. So this will take some time depending on how great Google servers are and our network. So we are presented with our overview of our new projects. It is created now. We have a database. And the first thing we want to do is that we want to initialize our Firebase in our application. We want to configure it. So what are we making here? Are we making an iOS app or an Android app or a web application? We are making a web application, so we push this button. And it will make a pop-up of the configuration. So I will just take this part, which is the essential part of the configuration, and I'll go back to our code. So let's go to our script. In our script, I've set up an Angular module called Fire App with the dependency injected Firebase. And if we want to configure it, we just use the config here and give it the configurations inside of here. So we know that this is going to run at the first in our application load. That's it. Now Firebase is up and running and we can use it. Great. So let's just get back here because I want to get something out of the way before I forget it. In the left side, you have some of the Firebase features like the authentication, the database, the storage, and that. But now we're going to take a look at this database here. And inside of here, you have 4 tabs. The data tab is, of course, our database structure, as I showed you in the presentation. And then you have the rules tab, which are the security rules, which I showed you. And as you can see here, they are very basic, and this is the default preset for our security rules, which states that auth is not null. That means that you have to be logged in with Firebase authentication to view, to read or write in our database. We don't want it to be that secure. So we are going to override this with the value true and the value true here and publish that. So now everyone can write and read from our database. That's great. And of course, if you are making any syntactical errors here, it will show you the error. And you can use the simulate buttons to simulate data input and if it works or not. That also goes for your validations that you make inside of here. But here we have our database. And this is our root node called it's set to null. And we can append this root node with objects. And we can keep on appending and so forth. So let's just start off by making one called messages. And beneath that, we have message 1 with the text hello world. Or let's just say hello ngAarhus with triple A's. Yes, that's great. There we have it. We have some data input inside our Firebase real-time database. So now we know when we have connected to the database and established that, we know that if we don't get this data out, we did something wrong. So in our module here, let's create a controller. And this controller, we remember in our index.html, we call it Fire Controller. So let's do that. Just for now, I'm not going to give it any dependencies or any injections right now, but I will do that later. So we first off make a variable called $control, which is equal to this, because that's how I like it. And then you want to make the reference. We want to make the pointer to this messages node inside our Firebase database. So let's do that. Let's make a var ref. And we are not very creative with our reference names or our variable names, so you have to bear with me. But we use the Firebase, and we initiate the database, and then we make a reference. And inside of here, we give it a string of which node we want to reference to, which is the messages. That's it. That's a reference. It's that easy. Next, we want to make an array bound to our controller, which we are calling messages. And here we are going to use the Firebase array service, which takes a reference. So now we are using the Firebase array service, so we also have to make sure that we inject it into our controller. Let's do that. Great. All right. So now we should be good. We have an array, and we just have to show it out inside our view. So let's make a list. A list is very great for showcasing arrays, and we make an ng repeat, repeats message in control messages. And inside of here, we want to output the message. And just another thing, I'm gonna do this instead. I'm gonna for the demo purpose, I'm gonna take message.text. So I'm gonna convert my data here, instead of it's just a string. I'm gonna make an object with the name text and then a string. So let's just erase that, and that will also delete our messages node because it's empty, like this. Here we make message1, which is an object, context text, and then hello ngAarhus. And here we are correcting our grammar issue from before. All right, let's have a look and see if this works. I hope. Bam, bam, bada bam, and we have it there. We have hello ngAarhus in our unordered list. Great. So far, so good. Let's try to see if we change it inside of here, what is going to happen. Enter. It's updated instantaneously. So almost no delay, not to the human eye. And this is very great that when I press enter, it changes instantly. And we can add another message to here called number2 with an object, say number2. Boom. And it's there. It was that easy with just this simple these lines of code, and you're set up. So let's do something with this data and with this functionality we have in hand. Let's just make let's see here. Let's make an input field, so we can write messages from our app because it's very tedious and boring to do through the console. And this is, of course, a text input. And it gets an ng model. And this ng model we are going to call for current message. Yeah. And beneath this, I just want to put this inside of a form. And we have it there, like that. OK. And then we want to make an input with the submit type. And in the end of this form, we of course also want an ng submit, so we can execute a method which we are going to call write message when the submit button is pushed. So let's execute the write message method, and as an argument, we are going to give the current message right here. We could also just take it from at the script, since it's bound to our controller, but let's just do this since it looks understandable and great. All right. So let's create this method so we have something to execute. Here, which takes a message. There we have to use the semicolon to, yeah. All right. So what do we do with this array? We have a synchronized array from our Firebase database. So we want to, of course, take this. Hello. And here we want to use the, if you remember, the $add method at Firebase array service. So let's do that. And what do we want to add to this array? Well, we structured our messages as objects, which contains the name text and then an value. So let's just give it an object with text and then the value as message. All right? And another thing, just before I forget it, let's just erase the text inside of the input field where we are writing our new message. OK, let's try to see how this is looking. All right, let's type a message here and press enter. And instantly, when I pressed enter, it's created a new object or a new message at our database. And as you can see here, this very, very weird looking thing is the unique identifier which Firebase are automatically creating for us from some kind of timestamp thing they're using. And we can keep on creating this, and it's great. And And if we go down here, we have the text and we have the value. Great. And let's just take a look at the other. Oh, it's updated as well. And we can keep on doing this simultaneously in both browsers. All right. So now we have established how to input data to a database. Now we want to delete that data as well and be in control of that. So let's make a method called delete message, and give it a function here where it takes a message, and we're doing that. And then we are taking the messages array, and we are using the $remove method. And as I said, in the Firebase array service, the remove method is not removing all of the array. We have to give it a specific item or index or record from that array. So since we are giving the message, our record as an argument, I'm just going to put it in here to make sure that that is the one being removed. We also have to update our view. So let's just, inside of our list item here, let's just create a delete button here. And we want to remove this and make the ng click, which activates our delete message. And inside of here, we want to just give it the message, which we are looping over. And we just give it a basic X for indicating that this is going to delete something. So let's take a look at our very beautiful list here. Yep. So I've not refreshed the other browser. That doesn't matter for the synchronization. It's still synchronized to the database. So if I delete something over here, you can see it is getting removed. And if we take a look over at our console, you can see there the red indicates that something are being removed from the database. And it makes a bit of a delay to make sure that you can see it. If it's yellow, it means that some kind of data is getting changed. And if it's green, it's some added data to the database. All right, let's try to make a functionality where we can change each individual message from our view. So we actually don't have to use the script this time. We can do all of this inside of the view. So let's just put the text here from the message inside of an input field. There we go. And we set the ng model to our message.text. There we go. And this will make an input field with the value of the individual messages. But we also want to trigger something when you change the method, and that is the update function. So let's just see here. I did that wrong. There we go. We want to update the array messages by using the method called save. And remember, again, with the Firebase array, you have to save each individual record or index. So here we are giving it the message, since that is the index. Let's have a look. And look over here again. All right. So if I change this, you can see it getting removed from both browsers. So imagine that these are two individual devices which are basically just talking to each other. It's maybe hundreds of users who are in a group conversation. Then you can do amazing things with this real-time functionality. Yeah, it's very great and it's easy, and you can type to the other guy. You can say, hello, John. And over here you can say, oh, hello, Alice. Right? All right. So how does this array look from our Firebase array service, and how does the objects look? Let's try to print out the. Let's see here. Let's try to print out the structure of what we get from the Firebase database. Then we do this by taking the messages here, and we are using the pipe JSON, so we get it in a JSON structured way. All right, let's have a look. There we go. A bit of a delay there. As you can see here, we have an array, which indicate let's just have a zoom. Sorry for that. It could be very, very hard to read at the bottom line. All right, so we have an array here, and this array contains a lot of objects. And each object is, of course, our messages. And our messages are having the text which we defined, and then it has an ID and a priority. The priority is used when people are simultaneously adding things to the database or changing things at the database. Since Firebase uses this priority to kind of to decide which one should be the first to execute. So it's kind of a queue system it uses here for the priority, and that's great. We don't have to bother about that. You just have to know that it is there. All right, so this is how the array service looks. Let's try to output the same reference, but in the Firebase object service instead. So up here, we are creating an messages object, which is equal to the Firebase object with the reference. And we, of course, have to inject the Firebase object in our controller. And inside of our view, instead of outputting the array of messages, we output the object of messages. So let's see here. It's the same data reference. It's the same pointer to the database, but the output that you get, the response, the data you get, is different. Let's see here. Now it's not an array anymore. It's just a big object with these IDs as the keys. As you can see here, our weird-looking unique identifier. And then you have the text name here and the F value in this case. So you can output the data from the database the way you want it, and you can put to these references that you make up here, you can make it a query instead. Instead of just taking all of the messages, you could put on the limit to first 5. And that would bring you only the 5 first messages here. And when I make a new message, it's not going to append to this one, but it is to this one because we haven't refreshed that browser yet. But you essentially get the point that that's how it works, and you can make services. You, of course, don't want all of this logic inside of the controller. You want it inside a service. But you can make a query service and so forth. So let's make something else just to demonstrate the capabilities of Firebase. Let's make an input field up here. And this input field has an ng model called control.settings.background color. And we, of course, also want to update that with ngChange when we are changing the value inside of this input. Yeah. All right. So let's make a reference to this settings place in our database. And we do that by using just the same variable that we have created above. And we are just setting to something else now, to the reference settings. And we don't have to create anything in our console over here, since it will automatically input the data at that location and create the child if it doesn't exist. So let's just go back here. We have created our reference, and we want to bind the data from this reference to our settings a variable. And we do this by using the Firebase object in this case, and it takes the reference. There we go. So let's have a look and look in our database. and we have the input field here. Sorry, it's a very ugly layout, but it works. So let's have a look at the console over here, and as soon as we type something over here, there should pop up a node called settings. And it didn't. That's great, right? That's great about the live demos. So let's just have a look here. Firebase objects. Here, ng model. Oh, that's right. That's right. Good point. And we can just save the entire object here. Good point. Now we have the settings. Thank you for that. And inside the messages, the settings, we have the BG color set here. So let's do something nice about this. We are going to create at our body the ng style. And inside of here, we are giving it a background color. And the value for that background color is taken from our background color in the database. So like that. Great. And let's see what we have now. So let's input black. And the view is now black. Let's update this as well so we have the comparison over here. All right. Let's input tomato. And both browsers' background color are changed to tomato. That's great. And of course, you can extend upon this. This is just you would not in some kind of way use this in the real world. Imagine if you have a chat application where every user had the ability to change the background of all the other users' background. That would be a mess, and that would be some conflicts, I would imagine. So that was the live demo of this talk to showcase the Firebase functionality. And then I have a slideshow here for questions. Yeah.
You talked about the denormalization.
Yeah.
How would you handle updates? You showed an example with the events and the attendees and so on. How would you handle the updates of the user information in the denormalized sets of data?
Yeah, good question. Because when you are denormalizing your database, you of course have the same data multiple locations in your database. So what if the user, let's call him John Doe, what if that user is editing his, let's say his biography inside his profile? Well, then the event attendees information, let's just go to the slide so we have something to refer to here. All right. Let's just give the nice animations over there. Yes, that's great. If David, now we take David, that's fine. If David changes his biography to something else, then we have to change his biography in both the user node and at the event attendees node. And of course, Firebase doesn't know about relationships. It doesn't have foreign keys, so it doesn't know that this string is the same as the other string. So you of course have to, as a developer, have to make the methods and make sure that whenever something is updated one place, it gets updated another place. It's not because when you're used to developing with Firebase in your application, you will get used to using this kind of database interaction. But if you of course are used to MySQL, for example, then you're used to everything being connected, and it's of course this is a weird thing, and you would think, why would anybody structure the data like this? It is weird, but it is functional as well. So yeah, good question, but you have to manage that yourself.
There's no easy solution.
No.
Hard labor.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You would use the events for that, right?
You would use the event for that. So you could use the on event or once event whenever something is changed, whenever, let's say, a user is editing his profile and he's pushing the button save, then you can trigger an on event or a service which you have in your Angular application, which then takes care of all the locations inside the Firebase database. You could have a node here. Imagine a node which consists of all the references which are duplicates. And then you can just pick that one out, and then you know what you need to update in your database when you're updating this value. You could do anything with this because data is cheap. So don't worry about filling your database with a lot of weird data, which you normally wouldn't in a SQL database. But think of it as a toolkit where you can just fill it up, use the storage, use Google storage, that's fine, and then have anything here to help you. And of course, if you can set it up in the way you want it, so you have the full control, and that's a positive thing for some people. For some others, they don't want to deal with it, and that's also totally fine. But yeah, you would use the event listeners for that. More questions? Yeah.
How about concurrency and is there any form of transactional security or anything? It's highly concurrent. If I have let's say 100 users doing work on the database, how is that handled? Is there any way of securing that these writes I'm making or these deletions actually also happen?
Yeah, you do this by using the security rules. The security rules is very powerful with the validate method, and you can validate on everything. And you, of course, each time you update or do anything with the database, you get a promise, and that promise you can of course catch an error if it didn't update. So if a user were to push save and Google server were down and it didn't update the data, then you could catch this error at the promise when it returns the error, and you could output an error message to the user.
Yeah, but I'm more concerned about the data.
The security of the data.
Yeah. What happens if two clients writes to the same reference at the same time? Which one wins?
Both. I get what you're pointing at. This is the priority deal with Firebase. It figures out who pushed the button first, who requested first, and then we'll put it in the right order. If you, as a user, if we take this example here, and we have the same input field up there, if two concurrent users are inputting data at the same time, who would win? Well, let's try it out. I have this, go to this web page here. Let's just see if we can zoom in here. Are you ready with your phones? It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, something like that.
All right, are you ready? The link is practice2-F25E1.firebaseapp.com. All right, users are editing the page. I have no control of this. Now everyone try to write something in the background color field at the same time. And then you can feel what it is like to edit something in the database. It's very conflicting, right? So Firebase is taking all these requests in and putting a priority to it, and the latest change is, of course, the concurrent change.
Someone tried to edit the top message and someone tried to delete it.
I think it would be deleted, because if you delete the message first, you cannot change the method. And if you change the method first and you delete it, it will still be deleted in the end. So, yeah. See, it's not that bad a design. It's a great layout. It's a great design. We don't need material design for this. It works. Yay. The users can be creative here. Yes. All right. Let's go. All right, let's jump back and let this have its own life over here. Is there any other questions?
If there is, you should catch Sandor in the break.
Yes.
Since, we're out of time. So
Thank you.
Give it up. Give him a big hand.